Manhood Neat podcast. D. Watt and I are back for the second episode of 2024. We are excited to be here. D. Watt, what has been going on this week?
Oh man, it's been a week, man. I'm glad to be sitting down here and chatting with you, and yeah, it's been a busy week on my end. What about you?
Just playing in mud, man. It's mud everywhere. Between the snow we had, it's now melting, and the rain we're having right now, and like at work, there's major construction going on, so they're tracking mud everywhere. It's been fun, I guess. It's been kind of crazy because me and my cohorts, which is the ag team's complaining about the mud. I know that's kind of funny, but the this international construction company is in the middle of this like $350 million expansion at the factory. They're just like taking over, and we're like sick of it, and so we're complaining to the guy who's like the liaison between the two, like, hey, they're in areas they're not supposed to be. They're making messes, and he's like, okay, I'll tell them. And then like finally we get sick of it, so we complain to the company side, this construction company, like, hey, you're not supposed to be here. Well, we're not technically supposed to speak to them because it's not our purview. So then they go complain to that same liaison guy. So he's like getting it from both ends. And so now we figured out that I've got to know some of the guys on the construction side. And so like we just make stuff up and send it to him. So he's just constantly getting bombarded. So it's good times, you know.
Yeah, like he doesn't have enough to do, but being a liaison between two massive companies.
Yeah,
y'all are just throwing stuff at him.
Yeah,
that's great.
So hey, it doesn't matter where you go in life. People are still people, and guys are all 12. You know.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's so accurate. I always when I was at the sheriff's office, and we deal with people, and some of my young deputies would get aggravated, and I'd say, hey, you got to think this is somebody else's kid. You're right. It doesn't matter that they're 55. Like, this is somebody else's kid. So yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So, but no. Well, guys, we're glad that you're listening to our listener, and we just thank you. And if you'd like to support our, I don't know if growing is the correct word, but our podcast, there's the easiest way to do that is just to share it out on social media. We are available on iTunes. We're available on Spotify. We are on Podbean. We are on Amazon. We are on iHeartRadio, and we are on Podchaser, which I don't know what that is, but we're on it. Basically, if you just Google search Manhood Neat Podcast, we'll pop up somewhere. But so yeah, you can share us, you can give us a listen, leave a comment, rate and review, all that stuff helps. And if you want to reach out and talk to us, if you got a question you'd like us to talk about, or you just got a correction to something we spoke on, just reach out at manhood.neat@gmail.com. That's manhood.neat@gmail.com. And one of us will get back to you, or we'll talk about it on one of the podcasts or one of our future question casts that we do from time to time. So, yeah. So,
yeah, sounds good. Reach out to us.
Yeah. Do we have a bottle of bourbon today?
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. We're going to drink Chattanooga 111.
Delightful.
Yeah, it is. Again, I'm showing my hand, but from the Chattanooga Whiskey Company out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. They have a really cool story. So, of course, the state of Tennessee itself, you could distill and make distilled spirits, but the city of Chattanooga, you couldn't. And so these guys got together and kind of put on their political armor, and they went to bat against the city and the county and got some state folks involved. And talk about stepping out in faith. They actually opened up their distillery, bought sourced whiskey from MGP, which is this giant producer in Indiana, and started selling it before the law was ever changed. Law gets changed, and they do some super cool stuff. I think they refer to themselves as a experimental distillery, or they have an experimental location. They do a lot of fun stuff, and yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. It's 111 proof. So we already did the math for you boys in Tuscaloosa, Jacksonville, Knoxville, and Iowa. But if you want to go the other way, it's 55.5% ABV. It is 2 years old, and I tell you that because once you try it, you're going to think there's no way this is 2 years. They do some funky stuff. They consider their whiskey a high malted bourbon. So, of course, for bourbon, it's got to be 51% corn. Mash bill on this is 75% yellow corn. And then 25% malted, it just says malt. So they won't tell us what it is. It just says malt. But the internet sleuths have determined that it's a percentage of malted rye caramel malted barley and honey malted barley. So they hold that kind of close to the vest. But I paid $45 for it here in Central Georgia. I've seen it as high as 55. So would you pay?
I can't remember exactly, but it was right around that $50 mark. So
Yeah. Yeah, and Chattanooga's got a couple staples. They make a 91 proof, which is really what the basis of this is. The 91 proof is a Solera cask method, which means that they just dump all the whiskey into a giant cask. It never empties so that they can keep the consistency from bottle to bottle. They do not do that with this. They actually do this in batches. So if you look on the side of your bottle, there should be a batch number on there, and the batch will tell you that, they took 7 to 10 barrels, distilled them in one run, and then put them together. So it's technically a blend if you want to go that route. I don't know if I would consider it a blend because it's all the same mash bill. It's just different barrels. So
yeah, so my batch number on this is 23-129R or 23I-29R. So
yeah, mine's 22D13R. And I also think we have different labels. So I think I have an older one. Mine is black and silver. And you have the newer one, which I think is gold, isn't it? Yeah. Yours is gold. So
we're reviewing maybe a slightly different flavor profile here because it's not the same bottle.
Yeah.
And so we got to just, open transparency here. So there could be a small differentiation in flavor based on the fact they are different batch numbers. But because we are separated by some distance and we have not yet met up to swap some containers, this is how we're going to have to do it for today.
Yeah. So we'll see what Chattanooga whiskey's consistency is like with the 111.
There we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pop this bottle. And a little pour. All right. So
also, shout out to Chattanooga for the fully corked cork. Yeah, I love that. It's really different. The first time I grabbed this, I thought something was wrong. I was like, oh no, this thing's going to break off in the bottle. No, they just cut it out of one solid piece of cork. I guess they don't attach it to wood or anything else. So shout out to them for being different. I can appreciate that.
So I'm just diving right in with my nose on this thing. Right off the batch, man, I get a lot of butterscotch on this thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So I'm getting tons of butterscotch. I'm getting some raisins. That dark dried fruit, and I do get a little ethanol in there. I get a little corn ethanol.
Yeah, I'm with you. Toffee, caramel, butterscotch, just the kind of sweet side, but it really does meet the dark fruit and the raisins. It is a really nice nose. It's got a lot going on. I also get just a little malt. And for me, when I say malt comes across to me kind of as a little like nutty, not like a green peanut, but just like a roasted peanut. That's what it comes across to me. So not a ton. It's not overpowering. I don't get one more than the other, but it's a really nice nose. A little ethanol, like you said, but I honestly would kind of expect a little bit more just based on the proof. I mean, it's 111 proof. Like that's nothing to shake a stick at.
And it's only 2 years old too, right? And so to not have that ethanol smell, a lot of times something that's that young, the youngness comes across in the ethanol.
Yeah, and for me, it comes across as like green hay. Like it's super thin and just smells green. And I know you can probably attest to that being, a farmer and all, but to me, this is just rich and complex. And if I hadn't have told you, you probably couldn't have guessed this was 2 years old, at least 2 years old.
Yeah.
That's an impressive nose for 2-year-old whiskey.
And I'll say that the smell on it, when I like a lot of like the beard oils and stuff, they have like a bourbon smell. It's like they're it's like they're taking this and sweetening it up, right? Like, but the basis is what this reminds me of.
Yeah, I could see that.
All right. Moving into the taste. Yeah.
Cheers. Man,
it's good.
That's good. It's rich.
Yeah,
super rich. It's full bodied.
So
it's sweet.
Yeah, it's very sweet. I get my first thing that hit when it hits is there's a lot there. And I don't mean a lot in so much really in depth of complexity, but it's just full. I mean, there's a lot.
Yes.
It's like your mouth is just clear
Yes.
full of it.
Yeah, that's why I say the word rich. Like it is not thin by any stretch of the imagination. I don't normally look at like the legs on the side of a Glencairn, but while we're sitting here talking about it, this thing's got some legs. I mean, it's rich. It's very thick. It's yeah, no doubt. I get raisins, some caramel chews, almost like the candy, and butterscotch. And then one of my favorite notes, just because we've had bees, I'm a beekeeper, is I get some honey on there, and it's nice. But I'll also get malt. I mean, which I feel like you should with a mash bill being 25% malt. So
yeah, I'm right there. Same thing. I get that sweetness, that dried dark fruit. I mean, where the sweetness really kind of comes in strong, and then the same thing. I put down craft caramels, right? The ones that look like bouillon.
yeah,
Yeah, that reminds me of that. It's because there's some vanilla comes in with that caramel.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking. I wrote down on my notes, caramel chew. Yeah, yeah. That's it. And then for the finish, it's sweet butterscotch toffee. And it's about a medium finish. It doesn't really linger on the palate. It kind of comes and goes. It's certainly a lot more. The finish is certainly a lot longer than the Evan Williams last week, but I would say medium in kind of my experience. I feel comfortable saying that.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think what's to me a little different about the finish on this is I get that baking spice into a black pepper right as the finish begins, as I open my mouth and kind of breathe. But then it quickly transitions back into that sweetness and just mellows out, and the sweetness is what kind of hangs in my mouth.
Yeah, no doubt. I can definitely see that. I wouldn't have necessarily picked up on that if you hadn't have said it, but I do get that. Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw out my score first this time, and so this is just the regular score. This is a sub $60 bottle, so we will be doing the value score on it as well. But for my main overall score, like if it's going to go on the board of greatness once we get that. And again, the thing is that we had this big break, and so I got to reboot, but I think that's like a 70. I mean, it's well above average. It's not top echelon, so and to me, like the highest I've rated things in the mid 80s, right? And so, I'm going to be stingy with the 90s, but I think that 70, it's solid. It's for its age, it's very good. It's got some depth to it. It's not super complex on the flavor profile, like you said. It's rich, it's full, but it's not super. I can't go on with layer after layer, and I really like a long finish. I like it to last. This has got that medium finish that pulls a few points off it for me, so I'm going to give it a 70.
Well, for the listener, we have not discussed our scoring or anything, but I'm also going to go with a 70. I think that this is. Just like you said, it's rich. It's and I get stuck on the age, and I shouldn't be an ageist, but for some reason it blows my mind that you can get these flavors and this rich, complex kind of palate off of whiskey that's essentially 2 years old. That blows my mind. And I understand they did something funky with the malt and the grain and the malts and all that sort of stuff, and it adds a lot of complexity and a lot of richness. I completely get that, but I've had 6, 7, 8-year-old Kentucky bourbon that ain't this good, and paid more for it, just because it had a certain company's and label on it. So, yeah, I'm right there. I'm a 70 on this. This is a pretty good value as I segue into our next.
Perfect segue. So we did pay a little bit different a price on this, and you've seen it vary in price where you're at, right? Mm-hmm. So let's just kind of average it and say $50, right? Because you've probably seen it. I've seen it as high as getting up close to 60, and I've seen it about 45. And normally I can find it every day between that $48.99 and $51.99 price.
Yeah.
So let's just say it's a $50 bottle for this. So at a $50 bottle, what would you score this on the value?
Well, again, if you look at the age and you look at the flavors and what they've been able to do with this is a value. I can't recommend this enough. I'm going to give this probably like an 85 on the scale for value. It's just hard to get what they've got in this bottle at that age, at that cask, at that proof, that ABV. I just think this is a real value, and I couldn't recommend it more to somebody who wanted to, it's not your typical atypical bourbon, but somebody that just wanted to try something different, but kind of stay in the bourbon wheelhouse. I think they've got the market on this.
Yep. So I had 76 down. Kind of the same thing. I think it's a really good bourbon to get somebody outside of, if they're wanting to venture outside of the heritage brands, the big dogs. If they're like, hey, I want to taste something a little bit different. It's a good place to go. That isn't going to. It's price competitive, but it's going to offer a different experience a little bit, and build that confidence to going into some of the the smaller distilleries out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, the overall average score is real easy because we both gave it a 70, so it's a 70 overall.
Yeah.
85,
right.
76. So we're looking at 79 and a half, I guess, on the value score, is somewhere in there. So
yeah.
So it's coming in pretty strong. So that's two good bourbons in a row that we've done. We've kind of been cheating because we're doing bourbons that we've both had like before, and so we knew we weren't coming in. So I do have a bottle that someone has donated to the cause, or sponsored, I should say. So I need to get you some of that, or we need to do that next time we meet up. I'm going to save what it is until we do it.
Okay.
But we got to do it soon so it doesn't, for some reason, evaporate out of my house.
And when you say evaporate, do you mean you drink it by yourself and I don't get
yes.
it? Well, listen, and I've got some bottles that aren't open that, I have a cabinet. It's not that anything's off limits or anything, but I've got some stuff that I would love to open and you and I share and talk about. So I understand. I've got mine kind of tucked in the back so that way they don't evaporate as well.
Yeah. So we might have to, of course it get a little dangerous, but if I come down for a weekend, we can just do 6 episodes just in a weekend or something.
I'm good with that. Yeah.
So, all right. So we're going to jump in. I guess I don't want to say blindsided because I gave you a little time to prep for it, but I guess what I wanted to talk about today, you hadn't really thought of until I brought it up. It's kind of what you
accurate.
Mentioned. So
yes, very accurate.
I couldn't really think of a concise way to put it, and I'll probably try to come up with some clever, title for this after we're done. So I kind of have Christianity in the state, but that ain't really right either. I guess the first question to kind of dive into this conversation about how should, and if so, how do we as Christians utilize the system for Christ, and should we, and what is justice in the world and justice with God? How do we make this all work, right? So my first question, I guess, is: do you believe there's only one standard that God demands of both Christians and the world? So regardless if you believe his standard or not, does he still have one standard that he requires?
Yes, I do believe that. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't think it matters, Christian, Jew, or Muslim, like Hindu, Buddhist, atheist, whatever. We're living in a world that he created. So if we're going to follow that logic, it would only make sense that his rules apply. Doesn't matter if you like him. Doesn't matter if, you want to listen to him or you want to read any of his books or any of that stuff. Ultimately, we're living in a world he created, so his rules kind of run roughshod over everything. They matter. So yes, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that, again, it doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. The standard is the standard. I mean, you can believe that the gravity's not real. Someone pushes you out of an airplane, you're going to fall either way, right? And so I agree. And so then the next question is: should we place those standards, or biblical standards, or God's standards, on our government, even to those who, to put into practice for society?
Yes, because again, those standards, if you have a biblical worldview, then those standards exist outside of the government.
Right. And so I kind of brought this up last week, and it's this verse I've been hit with a lot lately. So that's what made me think of this topic. But it's talking about, I always cover up what verse it is because the little iPad that you're sticking on covers up half my screen. So I think it's Mark. Let's see if I can move this. Yeah, it's Mark 6:16. No, that's not the right verse. Yeah, 17. So for Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, the brother of Philip's wife, who he married. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is unlawful for you to have your brother's wife." So basically, he's like, "Hey, you're committing adultery. That's your brother's wife. Like, you shouldn't be sleeping with her." Blah blah blah. Herod obviously is not a Jew, right? He's not a believer at the he's not Israeli whatever at the time, and so, but John's like, it doesn't matter. Like, this is the standard that you're supposed to be living up to regardless. And so this made Herodias mad, and we got the whole story. Then she ended up having Herod beheaded, right?
Yeah.
Through Herod. And so to me, it's like very much of if John the Baptist shows that, hey, I'm going up to the governmental system that has nothing to do with the theological belief I have, but this is the standard, and I'm going to preach it. And so that's what kind of got me thinking about it. And then the next thing I thought about it, like, so what is the role of government, right? And so when Christ says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's," is he only talking purely taxes, or does it also come with level of authority, the level of honor, respect, and all that kind of stuff you're supposed to give?
Yeah, so, we're talking about render under Caesar's what is Caesar's. That's going to be out of Matthew 22. We know that Jesus was trying to be called up by the Pharisees and some of the other political groups. And it was a catch-22 when they, rolled this question out to him in front of everybody. But it's always kind of been my understanding, and I always kind of felt like the Lord has always kind of led me to the fact that Jesus was drawing a sharp distinction between two kingdoms, that there are two kingdoms in this world, right? And Caesar holds power over one. And of course, we say Caesar because that's the context for the time, but that could mean, you could make Caesar whatever you wanted it to be in today's day and age, but the other kingdom being, God's kingdom. And so I think that, under Caesar, right, under anything that's not of God or not God's kingdom, we have certain obligations that involve material things. But under Christ, we have obligations that involve things that are eternal, right? So if Caesar demands money, then we give it to him, right? Because it's only money. But we also have to make sure that we also give God what is his. And that could mean, in your life, your struggle, your hurt, your hang up, your heartbreak, whatever that part looks like. But that could mean a myriad of things in this modern society that we live in. So it's just always been impressed on me that that's a sharp distinction, that Jesus is drawing a line in the sand that says, hey, give him what's his, but you need to make sure that I get what's mine as well.
Yeah. So, and then this kind of little tangent here, I guess, is, do pastors have a responsibility to guide their flocks in the political arena?
Yeah, that's tough. And you and I have talked a little bit about this prior to getting ready for this podcast, but I've never heard a pastor stand from a pulpit. I've been in church my whole life. I've never heard a pastor stand in a pulpit and tell me who I needed to vote for or make any kind of political statement. Now, I've seen videos, YouTube, that kind of thing, right? I've had videos sent to me by kids when we were in ministry. Hey, Mr. Daniel, tell me what you think about this, right? So I've certainly seen it. I know that it does happen. I do think that pastors and elders are responsible for knowing their flock. I do believe that they have to know, where their people are at, both emotionally, spiritually, politically. I think that if you look at Ephesians 4:12, there's some list of things, gifts that are mentioned. And so, it says he gave some apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, some teachers. So we know that everyone has someone over their flock, right? There's some type of shepherd. But I do believe that, we have to hold, it's their responsibility to hold their flock accountable to God's word. I'm not sure that they need to say political spousings from the pulpit, because when you go back to historically when the church and the state were split, it was actually a letter written by Thomas Jefferson. And the whole purpose of that was so that the government didn't intrude into the state. It was actually to protect, I'm sorry, the government didn't intrude into the church. It was actually to protect the church from a fledgling government that was still seeking for a power grab. So I would probably have an issue if somebody started making some political comments and statements. I think I would have heartburn with that, because I think I would be more worried about this pastor. I'd be more worried about him being concerned about my spiritual well-being and not who I'm voting for.
Yeah, I guess when I said in the political arena, I don't really think of it, I guess, as left or right, which party you're in. But when it comes to utilizing the political system we have, and I say governmental system, for furthering the kingdom of God and instituting His sense of justice, His rules of this, I stole this from the Steve Day show, so I can give credit to him. But he said, you can go to 90% of the pastors in this country and say, hey man, listen, I'm thinking about marrying this woman. I'm a young guy. I don't really know what to do. Like, can you give me some ideas on what I need to do to be a good, husband? And they'll be like, oh yeah, here's the verses, blah, blah, blah. Here's books, read this. Here's counseling. You do that, right? That same guy then, about 5 years later, he's like, hey, we're married. We're getting ready to have a kid. Do you have any instruction on how to be a good father? Pastor's like, yep. Here's a good book. Here's some verses, blah, blah, blah. And, he's like, hey, a few years later, hey, listen, I started this business. It's doing really good. Can you show me how to be a good steward with my money? Oh, yeah. So here's this. And then the same guy goes past me like, hey, listen, man, I've got some wealth. I got some influence. I'm thinking about running for a political position because I think I need to, this country's going down. I need to do something. Do you have any advice on how to do this? Good luck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
yeah,
that's the one part of it. And so I think I failed in that. And then two is there are times, not so much to be like, hey, you should vote for, Steve Jobs or whoever.
right.
But to be like, hey, coming up on the next deal is, House Bill 744, which is for the abolishment of abortion in this state. You need to go out and vote for that because abortion's wrong and we need to stop it for blah, blah. That's an easy one to go, but you never hear that. And my problem with it is they're more worried. To me, church is more worried about losing tax benefits than speaking truth into darkness, right? And standing against that. And we see Paul utilize the political system of his time to allow him to move throughout Rome, right? And to not get persecuted by the Israelis or the Jewish people, as fast. So I think we do have a political system that we should be utilizing to hold the world to God's standard, right?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to pastors knowing their flock, and it comes down to them equipping their flock. So if you know that you go to a very affluential church and that you've got a judge or an attorney or a district attorney or a guy running for sheriff or, running for mayor or whatever, right? I think it's your responsibility to look at that guy and go, hey, Brian, I don't care what political office you're running for, but I need to make sure that you are spiritually well. And then I think it's your responsibility to equip them to, I think it's the pastor's responsibility to equip them in that manner. And it comes back to, my flock knows my voice, that verse in, in John? John 10:27, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. I think that's where the pastoral side really, where maybe, and I hate to speak out against pastors because Lord knows people, if you're not praying for your pastor, you need to, but I know they got a lot on their plate. But I think that's, again, it comes back to, you were given the responsibility of this church, of this flock, and it's your responsibility to know them, to weep with them, to celebrate with them, and to be there to support them in possibly their political avenue.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of pulpits have failed at this, and I think there's a lot of reasons that I'm not placing blame at each individual pastor. I think that one, the way the Western Church is set up, the church where because we are a commerce based society where we think hey, I paid money, you do the work for me. That we've got this attitude in America of we pay the pastor, therefore they do the ministry, and we just show up.
I pay your salary. I can't tell how many times I heard that policing. I pay your salary.
Yeah.
Well, I need a raise, lady.
Yeah. But I think
yes, I agree. I agree.
And if you go back to me, like a biblical setup church is elder led. I mean, you've got a head pastor who's the first of equals, and he's your teacher, and he's the the employed guy. But you got to have a group of elders around him to help carry this burden.
Yeah.
But I do think we failed him in this, and we're seeing that, and I think part of it is, and we were actually Liz and I were talking about this last Sunday. So our church was closed because of cold weather. I know, sounds silly, but they had no heat in there, so it's cold. It's cold.
How far out in the country are you,
dude? I'm out there. Okay,
I know.
But so we went to a different church that was open with some friends, and the sermon was fine and everything. But I was just sitting there thinking, like, the one thing that I never get in any service ever is marching orders. And like you can like a sermon on spiritual warfare, but there's never marching orders. It's just like, I don't know, like to me it's the Francis Chan little thing where he's talking about like what would it look like if you got teenage daughters, right? If you told your daughters, hey, go clean your room. And they're like, what? And you're like, just go clean your room. I just want you to clean your room. And you're like, fine. And then like you go in there later and they got all their friends over and you're like, what are you doing? They're like, well, we're just getting together and we're talking about what it would look like if we cleaned our room. And you're like, okay, well, after that, clean it. And they're like, okay. Then you go back a few hours later and they're in there and you're like, what are you doing? They're like, well, we're writing out a plan and making a video series on how other people can clean their room. And you're like, no, just clean your room. And we never clean our room. We just talk about it and we formulate and we like meditating on what it would look like to clean a room. But God's like, you know what? Like all that stuff's fine, but there's got to be action. And and God, like to me, like most men want marching orders, right? Like go do this. I mean, if you think about it, that's why you can say, hey, let's have a bunch of guys get together and have a Bible study. You'll get like 5. You say, hey, let's have a bunch of men get together and we're going to go build this, whatever for these people who need it. And you'll get 30 because guys need action plans. And so I think when I talk about being active in politics, we don't have that. And to me, that's why we see the problems we have in our society because men aren't being called to show up.
Yeah. And I can definitely see your point in that. Francis Chan, I read an article famously, their church, I don't know if you've ever read it. This has been probably 20 years ago. And that's crazy for me to say. But he was talking about, putting, words into action and that kind of whole make me know it thing. And I think the article I read said that their annual church budget was $5 million and that they operated off like a $500,000 budget or something like that. And they gave every bit of it away. And I say gave, they were actively, supporting ministries and giving that money outside of his church, which I always thought was just so cool. Like talk about, giving somebody marching orders, that's incredible on Francis Chan's part. But I hear what you're saying about the marching orders part, but my concern is like, I don't want my pastor swept up in the daily news feed. Like if my preacher was on Twitter, I don't need his entire feed to be, full of politically charged, retweets about magazines and journal articles and all this sort of stuff. So that's the part that would concern me. I do think the church needs a voice, and I do think that we do need people who are going to stand up with the principles and the values that God has given it and that are espoused in the Bible. Like we do need those people, but I just don't want my pastor to just be tied up in all this mess because it's not God, it's of the world. And that's where my concern would be in just having this just, I want you to, again, I want you to lead the flock. I want you to check in with me. I want you to put your hand on my shoulder and go, brother, how is it with your soul? Is there a sin you need to confess? Is there something going on? Is there something you need to talk about? Do we need to go eat lunch? Like, that's what I would much rather have than some type of, you know, militant kind of wagging your finger at me across the pulpit, telling me that, my conservative or liberal values, however I may have, aren't any good, and they don't line up with the Lord. Like that, that's not what I personally need.
Okay, so that rolls right into the next one. Should we be politically active in stopping things like abortion, LGBTQ agendas, racism, school indoctrination? So, I mean, like, I got, and so these are all things that are against God's justice, right? And his law. I mean, and so, and the reason I chose the ones I did, so I was sitting there, I was thinking, like, okay, these are all like hot topic, deals. But I started looking at, like, for lack of a better word, the progressive Western church. Well, they'll call out somebody who's racist and say that's terribly evil, which it is. I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no sins that are greater or lesser than others, right? And so racism is terrible. But these same churches then will say, but if somebody falls into the LGBTQ agendas, they're like, well, we need to just love them and, not like just love them where they're at. And so, and I'm not saying that you have someone who has had an abortion or who is, transgender, or you have someone who's even racist, shows up to your church, you're like, get out until you fix it. I'm not saying that at all. So when I say politically, I'm talking about stopping organizationally the marches of any of these type of things, right? So to stop abortion from being legal, to stop, the transgender surgeries for minors, should we be politically active in doing that? Abortion, obviously, from schools teaching things that are just 100% blatantly false, that they are the antithesis to truth. Should we be involved in these things?
Yeah, and that's tough, because obviously, some of the stuff you mentioned are just, categorically against anything that the Bible says, so we know that the Lord has already told us this is wrong and that it's a sin. Like you said, to kind of echo what you said, obviously, all sins are created equal. So, whether it's the abortion or if it's racism or, the fact that, I lied to my daughter about eating a Big Mac in my truck in the driveway, like it's all weighted the same, right? But I think that we should be politically active. But again, when I read that, it makes me think like picket signs and like Twitter articles, and it immediately gives me, and there's a rub here for me because I've just not given this a lot of thought outside of before you and I sat down to do this. Because again, I don't want my church politically charged. Like I want to know my Bible better than I do the latest tweet from like Charlie Kirk or Candace Owen or whoever, right? And so I really have a hard time giving this a lot of weight because I know that it's wrong. Like in my heart, kind of the way this works in my brain is like, I know it's wrong. I don't agree with it. And so I kind of like fall back to like, Jesus and like what he would do. Well, I mean, we have the example of the Samaritan woman at the well. Culturally, he wasn't supposed to have anything to do with her. Samaritans were considered dirty and unclean and a lower class race. And Jesus stands at the well and he talks to her and he, has this interaction with her and she leaves changed.
Right. But and this is, I guess this is. I was going to use the same example, so this works out well. But he never condones what she's doing.
Exactly. I was getting ready to say the same thing.
Yeah.
No, we're on the same page about that. He never condones her being a prostitute.
Right.
Never. But what he does is that he literally shows her the love of the Lord. Like he has an interaction with her that leaves her changed. Now, do we know what she did? Do we know that she ran off and said, "I'm not going to do this anymore"? We don't know, and there's no reason to think that she had this life-changing encounter other than what the text tells us. But you're right. He never condoned her activity, but he also didn't like wag his finger in her face either.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. And so I don't know. I just think that we have a tendency to try to be nicer than God. You know what I mean? And so what I mean by that is 100% believe the whole love everybody. Like, we're called to love our enemies, let alone somebody we have a difference of opinion on a sin, right? And so because there's people who might fall into, who believe abortion's okay, right? But they're not actively trying to kill me, right? But we're called to like we're called to love those who even are actively trying to kill us. And so I think that we can do that, but we've got a tendency to be, because we're not God, right? And so we have a hard time balancing justice with mercy. But we're charged to, like, you know what I mean? Because we're supposed to be imitators of Christ. And so, and Christ even says, like, I didn't come to bring peace, but to bring a sword, right? And so he, like, there's only two things that went out: his justice or his mercy. That's it. Like, if you go to hell, that's God's perfect justice winning. And if you go to heaven, that's God's perfect mercy winning. That's it, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but I just think that we should be, again, and it is very hard to distinguish between loving people and stopping, terrible, just organizational sin that is destroying the very, destroying the foundation of the society we live in. And I know a lot of people say, and this kind of goes to the whole Christian nationalism thing, like, this is not our kingdom. We are sojourners here, but we are also still stewards of what we've given. And God did institute 3 organizations: the church, the family, and the government. Like, those are the 3 ordained, like, systems, and they all have certain powers that they have been given. And it works best when they fall into the right thing, into the right amount of power,
Yeah. And just to go back to kind of just speaking from my personal life, and I'll have to speak very broadly because you never know I don't want to offend anybody, but I did have somebody in my life transition from a male to a female. And when I knew this person as a male, it was great. He was a great friend. And now when I see her, it definitely is not always easy, right? But she and I've had conversations, and I call her a she, whether it doesn't matter what she is biologically, but I call her a she because, yes, she's transitioned. I don't agree with it, but like, a lot of people don't call her that. And so I feel like that's a way for me to, like, show that I do love her. I don't love the decision that she made. I don't love anything about it. And I've told her that I think she was wrong, that this isn't the way God made her, that God made her perfectly just the way she wanted, just the way he wanted her made. We had those conversations and they weren't easy. But on the other side of that, there was an opportunity for me to just put my arm around her and say, but look, I love you. I don't agree with it, but I'll always answer the phone if you call, and that still is tough for me, because I don't agree with it, but I just don't know what else to do.
Well, and so I think this is a good example of, on the individual basis, that's the thing. Like, that's the correct way to approach it, right?
I hope.
Yeah,
I'm right.
I mean, I think it is, because you're not condoning it, but you're showing that, hey, just as Christ leaves the door open for you to come to him, I'm leaving the door open for you to come to me, as a friend. The difference would be like, okay, that doesn't mean I'm not going to try and stop the legalization of reassignment surgery for minors. Like, I'm still going to pursue that not being legal,
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's like, I mean, I know people who've had abortions.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm going to stop trying to get it to be illegal, and then, I'm quoting an earlier podcast, but we talked about this. I said, if so you've been in law enforcement for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you found out that they were, at Perry Elementary, there was somebody every day walking there and shooting 4 kindergartners, you would probably do something to stop that.
Yeah, probably they're waiting on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
So why don't you make any efforts to shut down the abortion clinic in town?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a gut check to me too, but to my thing is like, if we truly believe what we say on any of these things, that the severity of what's going on is as severe as it is, we should stand opposed to it, and do what we can within both God's approval, what we can do, and we are still granted a political system that we can move in and make change. And I don't care what's, and I'm not talking Republican versus Democrat because they're both corrupt, right? But I'm just talking. I'm literally talking about the political system, as in the way we can move through the government, the way we can utilize courts, the way we can utilize. Our votes do matter on a local level still, in like trying to get people into the whole idea of the smallest magistrate or the least magistrate, where like we're seeing with Texas right now, where they're like, the Supreme Court's like no, and they're like, yeah, we don't care, we're gonna keep doing this anyways. But it's like, so that kind of brings it to is like this idea of utilizing what we have to try to keep God's justice and God's rule set. And I know that none of us are saved by following God's law and anything like that, but you can see it through history that there is a blessing and stuff that goes along when a nation does try to fear him and follow his commands, whether all the people are Christians or not, right? And so, and more people, it's cyclic too. We got the whole thing of when the church is persecuted, it grows and all that kind of stuff, because that's all true. Right. But obviously, I mean, we're called to be salt and light, and part of that is light casts out darkness, right? So, what does that all mean?
I don't know. It makes me think of, Lecrae Moore, the Christian hip hop.
I know
artist,
who he is.
The rapper.
We haven't met in real life, but I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, you know who he is, right? Okay. And he kind of went through this deconstruction a couple years ago, and one of the things that he talked about was kind of in this same vein, his identity. Is he a rapper that happens to be a Christian, right? Or is he a Christian rapper, right? So it's kind of the idea of, are they the same? Are they different? Why am I treated differently? I look at somebody like John Bellion. I don't know if you know who John Bellion is, but he's a rapper, singer, producer. He's incredible. I love John Bellion. But he's an artist, right? A pop artist, whatever category you want to put him in. In fact, he tries not to be in a category. It's one of the things he works really hard at. It's pretty cool. But he has absolutely no problem talking about Jesus and saying Jesus's name in his songs, right? But he's not categorized as a Christian artist, right? He's still Grammy, Billboard Top 100. So I use those examples kind of in this example, like, which one is it? Are you a Christian that lives in this world? Or are you in this world and you just happen to be a Christian? Does that make sense?
A little bit.
Okay. And maybe I'm
I get your analogy.
I'm digging too much into it.
I get your analogy, but what are you trying to say through that analogy? Are you saying that if we are worried about how society's going and all these things, we are of the world who happen to be a Christian, as opposed to sojourning through not caring? To me, I look at it as, I want America to go well. Part of it is because I'm an ugly American and I like eating too much ice cream and watching football, but and having good bourbon. But at the same time, like, that not only are, like, I get it. Doesn't matter if the only sin you committed was driving knowingly 2 mile an hour over the speed limit on a Thursday afternoon when you were 25, right? So let's say that's the only thing you're committed. You still deserve hell just as much as anybody else, right? Or
Right.
you're born in the sense you deserve hell from the moment of your conception, but or if you're Hitler, right? It doesn't matter. Like we all deserve hell just as much, and so and only in Christ's atonement covers just as much for both, right? So I get that. So like a common thing, and I used to think the same thing. Like when I was younger, and it was, I don't know, like I hate to say this now, but I kind of got into that whole like blue like jazz book movement thing, So have you read that?
Are you talking about Andre 3000's new album?
No, blue like jazz.
Okay.
Blue like jazz. I can't remember who wrote it. It was in like early 2000s. It kind of was the beginning of not really. I want to say the deconstruction movement, but like the whole anti-established church and like my faith is only about me. I don't need guidance from anybody else type movement.
Okay.
Which I'm like, Christianity is not a religion, but we need eldership. Like we need guidance, right? And so, but I lost my train of thought. Hold on a second. Oh yeah, but again, it's the thing of like, okay, if someone is getting an abortion, like the problem is not that they're getting an abortion. The problem is they don't know Christ, right? Okay, that makes sense. Like that makes sense, and that's true. It doesn't matter. You can live all the tenets of the Christian life. If you don't know Christ, it doesn't matter. So that's true. But if there's also a lot of pain and suffering that come with going through an abortion, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of pain and suffering to go through that people have when they are so, like people like struggle with their identity that they feel like transgendering is the correct way to go, right? Like there's like they lack a identity to the point that they're like, I'm not even the right gender. Like that's crazy for those of us who don't get it, but they truly believe that. There's a lot of hurt there. There's a lot of pain there that they don't have to go through, right? And so, yes, them meeting Christ is the ultimate answer, but the loving thing to do is also to put systems in the place that if they don't get there, we are still in, at least in this mortal realm, saving them from these things.
Right.
And so that's when I look at these, like this stuff, and like, like the instance is like, okay, if we don't care if people want to do this, what does it matter if one person thinks that other people are lesser people? Because that's ignorant and it's wrong and it goes against God and it causes pain on both sides, right? It causes suffering on both sides. And so like we should stop all racism, we should put a stop to it. And all these things, because it's not, it's a secondary motivation. And so it's secondary to like you were saying, should your hard stance on what you feel about transgender surgery, should it come before your friendship with this person? No, it should not. But it's still secondary, and the truth is still there. And I think that we should still act upon it, as long as we keep our priorities straight.
Yeah, and I think to kind of echo what you're saying, a lot of that comes from having a relationship with somebody. A friend of mine, one of his family members, who he's unbelievably close to, came out as being a lesbian, right? And he was the staunch, gays are going to hell. Like he was pretty outspoken and pretty, his views are very far right conservative when it comes to it. But of course, when one of your favorite humans in the world comes out of the closet, that'll make you recalculate some things, right? And so that's what he had to do. And he would tell her all the time, like, I love you. You are welcome at my house. Your partner can certainly come and enjoy the weekend, but like, y'all can't stay here together. Like, that's not going to happen. And so when one of his favorite people come, like, they have to go stay in a hotel room. And it's just like, he just refuses to condone it, but he's not going to lose the relationship over it.
Right.
And I don't envy him in that at all. I know it's a tough, we've kind of navigated it together, and there's been some tough conversations, a lot of tears, it's tough. It's tough, but I use that example because the relationship was there. Just like my friend who transitioned, the relationship was there. And so, I felt like I said what the Lord put on my heart, and then that was it. and now it's just time to be my friend. I'd been promoted twice while I was at the sheriff's office, and she was one of the first phone calls I got. Hey, you big, and she called me some names, you big joker. I'm proud of you. I never would have thought they'd put you in charge of other people's kids, that kind of thing. Like, I mean, she was always the first one to call me. So that gave, it's because the relationship was there before me standing on the street corner, yelling into a microphone, wagging my finger, that kind of behavior.
Yeah. And I guess to kind of close up this little segment, my thought on it, or final thought on it, and you can disagree or do whatever, is we don't need to approach them as mutually exclusive. We can take a hard stance in the way we vote, the way we are politically active or socially active, to shut down things that are not in line with God, with the scriptures, and at the same time we can love others who fall into those categories we're trying to end. Like they're not mutually exclusive. And so
absolutely, you said that well. I agree, but I think we get lost, and society gets lost, and we draw lines in the sand, and
and it's hard.
Hatfield and McCoy's like, you can't talk to me, I can't talk to you, and God forbid we have any type of relationship. I think you nailed that.
Well, and so like I have some prayers that are just continual prayers for me. And one is always I want supernatural wisdom and discernment that comes only from the Holy Spirit, right? And I always say that wisdom is the art of living well, right? And so it's skillful living, and so I want that, and I want to have discernment of truth from falsehoods. But my other one is, Christ, I want to see people the way you see them. Like I need to have your heart, because I can very easily get calloused, shut my emotions off. This is the mission. I'm going to do it, and everybody else be damned, right? I mean, that's just that's my natural inclination. And then, so I need, like, no, God, like my heart needs, and it's a lot of, actually read this book, or a lot of books on worldview, because I taught this worldview Sunday school class. And it really kind of was more me just teaching myself, or Christ teaching me through the books, was like to break for people because of how their mind works and how they see things. But I feel like then a lot of people then are the other side, where their natural tendencies to be the compassionate side, and they don't have the mindset of being on the offensive and fighting back what I call the spirit of the age, right? Like the demonic forces that we're fighting against that are influencing people into these lifestyle choices. But because, like we talked about earlier, a lot of what we hear from the pulpit is just love people, love people, love people. They never feel like they're missing the other half. And Christ, we see both sides. Like he is there to love, and he's there to bring justice. And so all we kind of teach is the love side, right? And that's I think the reason for that is, you back up in time 100 years. I think people were more callous, on the get-go. And so that's what they needed to hear more. And now what's happened is we've swung the pendulum, and a lot of people are this, lovey-dovey side, and there's good parts of that, but they don't balance it out with the sword, right?
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. There was I guess, Christian pop song released, I don't know how long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago now. It's got a guy named Brandon Heath, and I hated it because it would always get stuck in my head. But the kind of chorus was, give me your eyes for just 1 second, give me your eyes so I can see. And what a powerful prayer. Because you're right, people do get callous. I can speak to that, being a road cop for 12 years, 13 years, I've seen some wild stuff, bro. And I've seen some stuff that would assure that it basically confirmed to me that if the Lord doesn't call you into public safety, you probably don't need to be there, right? He gifted me with a box that I can tuck everything in, and then every now and again I just let it out and empty my little box, and then I'd go fill it back up with all the other stuff that cops and firefighters and military guys and EMTs that we see every day. So I can definitely understand the callous nature in which you speak of. I can testify to that as a primary source. I'm definitely callous in a lot of things, but that's a strong prayer, and that's something that I could probably add into my prayer life, because I am kind of, while I'm still in public safety, my job now is kind of public safety adjacent, and so I mean, I still police every day. It's just a different kind of policing, and but it's definitely
Hey,
given
you
me
have to
a
deal with
chance.
you got to deal with horse women, so like that takes a whole different kind of patience.
That and dog people, man. You ever seen the movie Best in
Oh
Show?
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah, that
real.
is just so it's so accurate. It's so accurate, it's scary. But I'm public safety adjacent now, and so it's definitely given me some time to unravel some stuff in my brain, and you know, I, that's just it's a prayer that, like I said, I could probably add to my daily prayer of, Lord, let me be a little softer in some things, and that could go from my wife to my kids to the people that work for me.
Yeah, you can stop kicking your dog every night when you come home, right?
Lord, I've got the best dog, man. I would never kick him. He's just a 120-pound baby.
So, all right, so we're at an hour, which is normally our quitting
Okay.
time, but we're 2/3 of the way through this. Are you good to keep rolling, or do you want to shut her down?
Yeah, I'm good either way, man. I'm whatever you want to do.
Let's just I'm gonna skip a couple. We'll just go here to the last couple points, and let's just push through this. I think.
Okay. Are you
So
going to just cut our little chatter right here?
no, dude, this
No.
the
Okay.
curtain. We're
Okay.
unfiltered, man. We let everybody know.
Okay.
This is
All
inside
right.
baseball.
All right.
So,
All right.
but and unless you like drop the F bomb, no, I probably won't edit that
Yeah.
either. So.
No, I don't plan on saying that.
Yeah. So we had it once. It was
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was excited to hear it.
Ben
And
Lewis's son.
I've never heard it before.
Yeah, that's right. So
Can you imagine Ben Lewis as a father? Like, was he disappointed or proud?
no, he was like, oh, he was in the room. He's like, first F on my son. Awesome.
There was a moment of proud fatherhood there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. I had one just as a sidebar. We were standing in the pig barn. My oldest daughter shows pigs, and one of the breeders was standing. This was a couple years ago. And one of the breeders was standing there, and he starts talking about the pig's anatomy and talking about the male pig and how you just gotta. And he goes into this kind of graphic description, and my girl just stands there. My oldest, she just stands there and laughs and goes, "Huh, that must suck." And then she just walked off. Part of me was like, "Yeah, girl," like it was just a real confusing moment as a father. I didn't know whether to be proud or be like, "Hey, what do you know about that? Come here."
that's funny. So, all right. So, I just want to kind of shift into. We've kind of talked about fighting against, things that are in opposition to Christ when it is policy and that kind of stuff. So now my question is, when the government itself is mandating things to go against God,
Yeah.
and I put civil in there, but is civil disobedience allowed? So I'm not saying we get arms to go shoot the government, right?
Right.
And that's a whole nother podcast because how we feel about that one. But it's like civil disobedience allowed. And so I'll use a very just, not that long ago example would be during the COVID lockdowns. There are a lot of churches that said, you know what? Thanks for your advice about not getting together, but no, we're still going to meet because the Bible says don't forsake the gathering, and we think it means to meet in person. So this is what we're going to do. And so this topic's not whether or not that verse actually means to meet in person or, whatever.
Right.
But if something like that were to happen, is it, at what point is civil disobedience allowed? Is it anytime that they outstep their bounds in Christ in God's world or God's eyes?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to look and see, are there examples of civil disobedience in the Bible? And boy, howdy, are there, right? We've got Exodus 1, the Pharaoh gave the clear command to Hebrew midwives. They were going to kill all the Jewish babies, and they didn't, right? And we know that that's how, Moses kind of made it in. We know that Rahab in Joshua 2 disobeyed a command from King Jericho to produce the Israelite spies, instead she let them down the rope and escaped the city. And I can go on. I mean, we got Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to the golden idol. They disobeyed King Nebuchadnezzar. We know that Daniel defied King Darius in chapter 6. So, look, and that's just the Old Testament. There's quite a few in the New Testament. So we know that civil disobedience is in the Bible. This is nothing new. This isn't some new term that's been made up by media or some scholar who's tucked away in a locker in northeastern part of the United States. Like, this is a thing. So, as a Christian, I don't think we should be fearful in that, oh gosh, they've never dealt with this. No, there's plenty of examples. I guess my concern would be, at what point do Christians disobey the government, right? And I think that, one of those things is when the government compels or demands evil, right? And I'm not saying, we'll go back to your example during lockdown, like, I'm not calling COVID evil or anything like that, but like, was there a reason to lock down? Like, our church did. We have an older congregation. And so, because they didn't know a lot about COVID and they were concerned that, maybe a quarter of our church would die, we did the remote viewing thing for a while. I don't think because I believe your church, when y'all were in Nebraska, refused to shut down, and y'all stayed open, right?
No,
maybe for like a week or two.
We shut down for a little while.
Okay.
So the difference is so when we reopened, and we had a pretty short lockdown outside of Lincoln, Omaha, the whole state. But when we reopened,
I remember y'all's being a lot short. Like, Georgia was quick, but I remember y'all's being pretty quick too. And especially I remember that in your church.
Yeah.
That like sticks in my brain for a reason.
No, so when we came back, basically what happened is when we came back, they had the mask mandate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to gather, and so and there was a group of us, actually kind of most of the guys in the podcast, so I got to know them, but who were like, our family's not wearing a mask, right? We're just not doing it. Like, we're not covering our faces when we worship. And so we said no. And the church elders then basically got together and they said, listen, the law is we have to put up a sign that says anybody that comes in has to wear a mask, but we're not an enforcement agency of any law, of any governmental law. And so we're not going to ask anybody to leave who doesn't. We're not going to ask anybody to put one on, take one off. If they want to wear it, it's up to them, blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of what our church stance was on it was. And then we did make the decision after that if there wasn't our lockdown, that we're done, right? Like, we're not locking down. We're going to keep going. Now, we had a lot of friends, and actually, so one of the a blessing that came out of COVID is we had a lot of friends who were like, you know what? Church isn't meeting. We still want to meet. And so we had a group of us who just got together a lot and did church ourselves because okay, we can't go to a big building that, we paid for, like, whatever, who cares? We're going to meet in our garages. And so, which is how the early church did it anyways, right? And that has it. So,
home church. That's right. That's right.
So, and I think that like if it were to happen again, let's say, we get COVID 25 and they're like, same thing. We're going to lock down, can't meet in church. I'm sorry. Like, not doing it. Like, I'm meeting. And if the church I go to is like, oh, we're closing down. Well, guess what? That's great, but you're not a church. I'm not coming back because, especially now, it'd be different if there's like literally you can see bodies piling up on the street. That's different, right? You know what I mean? But
yeah.
So, but I don't know. I just think that civil disobedience is not. We have to always put God's laws first and His commandments first.
Yeah.
So, and I think that
especially when the government laws are or their commands or their edicts, whatever word you want to use, are in direct violation of God's law and commands. I think that's when civil disobedience is acceptable.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, for instance, like we've pulled our kids out of public schools because of, we've had issues in the past of what's being taught, right? And then we went to private school, had issues with what was being taught there, so now we're homeschooling. Let's say tomorrow they say, hey, new law, homeschooling is now, you can't do it. It's illegal. You have to send your kids to public school. No. Nope. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for the advice. Not going to happen. And I'm to the point that if you want to come get my kids, you better bring ammo, right? So, but not that I think that's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
It might eventually. But I think like those are the kind of things I'm talking about. Like, it's okay to stand up when the government is moving outside of its purview, and directly being counter to the word of God. I think that disobedience is not only warranted, but it's called for.
Yeah, I agree. But that doesn't give you an excuse to speed or drink and drive, right? Or not wear your seatbelt.
Well, then that goes against the word of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't there something in Matthew about putting your seatbelt on?
Yeah. No, that's in Hezekiah.
Hezekiah, my bad.
Yep.
I get those books confused sometimes.
So, and we kind of already talked about the last little settings I had. I was talking about, how do we tear down opposed systems but love individuals. We've already kind of already hit on that. So
yeah, and that last point, acceptance does not equal love. Like that. I mean, we talked about that. Like, I don't accept it, but it doesn't mean that, I don't love you any less or what.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would hit on that is that kind of go along with that is that loving somebody doesn't always mean that you're making them feel good. Like I love my children, but when I take away things because it's not good for them or there's punishment because they need a corrective, in the moment it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily like, my kids are both beyond spanking ages, right? I'm just talking about like what's funny is I think my kids, it's worse now when they lose their technology time than when they got spanked when they're younger.
No doubt. My youngest and my middle were yelling at each other. And listen, that's not how Ashley and I communicate. Like, we don't communicate with each other that way. We don't communicate with them that way. So wherever they learn this idea that we're just going to yell at each other until one of us, kind of folds, it flew all over me. So, and they were trying to make one of their beds. And so I walked in there and I said, you got 2 minutes to make this bed and figure out how to communicate effectively, or I'm taking your devices for the rest of the day. And by Job, it was like gas on a fire, buddy. They started yelling louder, and they were like, this is your fault. Get this corner, right? So, of course, they never made it. And they're in tears. And Ashley and I walk in there and was like, hey, could you grab that corner? And she was like, sure, Daniel, I would love to. And we made that bed in like 40 seconds. Oh, my gosh, they were so mad. Way worse than any spanking I could have ever given.
So if I could go back in time, and change one thing about my parenting technique is I would not teach my kids oral language until they're like 12, and they can only communicate in sign language. Because they'd be like, and I'd be like, okay, because you can't yell fast in sign language, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think in theory it sounds good, but I'm not sure in practice that's going to be a good thing.
No, I'm going to write a book, Aaron's Guide to Effective Parenting. Don't teach your kids to speak. There's a bunch of Helen Kellers running around. So,
yeah, that's funny.
But anyways, all right. Well, we're at hour 12, so we did good. We got through the last few pretty quick. So, you got any closing comments, concerns? Disagreements?
No, and look, this isn't easy, and I said that at the beginning. Like, some of this stuff kind of stretched me, and it's just because I had never thought about it. But I think kind of my conclusion and where I landed on is that your whole life has to be oriented toward God, and that if your life, is oriented toward God, then you're going to have the answers that you seek. God's going to give you that, supernatural discernment, that supernatural wisdom that you talked about, and I think that you'll come to your answers for a lot of this. This is just two guys sitting in a room drinking bourbon, and this is just our opinions, and our opinions are based on our life experiences, and it may not be the same for our listener. But I believe that, I go back to my friend that transitioned, like, I sought the Lord hard on that. I prayed hard about that, and it took some time to come to that conclusion, but my focus in my life was oriented toward the Lord, and I believe that's why I got the discernment I got. So that's kind of where I land, is that a lot of this is going to come down to you studying the Word of God, learning these stories, and making sure that your life is oriented toward God in all that you do. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that staying in the Word, walking daily with Christ is the only way to navigate any of this. And like take time and do a little self-evaluation of what your natural tendencies are. Like are you naturally just passive and are like, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna like let people do their thing, and I'll love them where they're at, which is there's a large aspect of that that's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other people who are like, hey, I want to make sure the world, knows the truth and like pays for when they fall short, and all this kind of stuff. And and there's some good parts of that too. But we've got to bring it all together. And so ask Christ to show you, what side of this conundrum are you on? How are we to love others, but to stand for truth? It's a topic that just keeps rolling through. But we are definitely living in times where it confronts us more and more on a daily basis than it did 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so we need, I've got to figure it out for myself because I've got to teach my kids how to deal with it. Right. Like I'm charged with that. And so, that's why I'm having a discussion. It's not really for our listener or for you. It's just so I can learn. But I do think that there's a lot of, I've been bombarded with a lot of things I haven't thought of in years past because I haven't had to. And so as we move into this crazy time that we're in, like how do we always present Christ? I mean, that's our goal. Like it's present Christ.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
That's where we're hanging out. So yeah, stay in the Word and stay in prayer and get good men around you to mentor you. So
no doubt.
I'll close in prayer and we'll shut her down.
Yeah, roger that.
All right, dear Lord, we just thank you for this night, with this chance to get together. We do just pray for the listener. Anything he's going with, Lord, just speak boldly and mightily into his heart and into his life. We just want to glorify you in our walk, in our day-to-day interactions. We want to be salt and light. We wanted to be the very essence of those things. We want to cast out darkness, and we want to preserve your name in this world. We just thank you for this time, and we give it all unto you. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. We'll catch you next time on the Manhood Neat podcast. All right. Finals, Destiny. What are we going to do? What are we doing?
Yeah, we can play some finals. I'm good with that.
All right.
I don't